Good morning and welcome to another episode of the Supply Chaney podcast. My name is Nathan Chaney and I am your host today on this discussion with AJ Orr from Simple Plan IT. I met AJ some time ago at an IWLA, and for those not in the know of every acronym in the logistics industry, that stands for the International Warehousing Logistics Association, I believe. And AJ was actually speaking at that event here in Fort Worth when we ran into each other like at the happy hour afterwards. It's the best place to be, I think, at every conference. And
Agreed.
anyway, so we were chatting, and we've kind of just kept in touch since then. And he is an expert in digital risk, and he's got a book, and he does a lot of speaking, and he knows his way around the security environment and supply chain as well. So I thought there's so much discussion going on these days with cargo theft and freight fraud and all that sort of good stuff, and then just general risk associated with everyone's digital and technology sort of environments they've got around their companies. So I want to bring Jay on today, AJ, and learn a little bit more. So without further ado, I'll hand over the digital mic to you for a second and talk us a little bit about yourself and let us know who is AJ.
Thanks, Nathan. I appreciate you having me on. Yeah, it was back in November, I think, was when we ran into each other and met at IWLA. And so I'm glad we were able to finally get together and put this on.
Yep.
Um, as you mentioned, my name's AJ Orr. I'm the founder and CEO of Simple Plan IT. I'm also an Army veteran, an award-winning author. I wrote the book The Art of War and Business Technology, and started my company back in 2012. It's an interesting journey into entrepreneurship because I never really set out to start a business, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure we'll dive into that a little bit more as we get into things.
I love talking about that founder story and hearing, my actual favorite podcast is How I Built This. It's probably a weird one to be using while you're running or riding or whatever. It's not exactly an adrenaline pumping sort of a soundtrack, but I love hearing stories of the trials and tribulations and the successes of starting something from nothing, and especially when you didn't actually really intend to do it like that adds just an actual another layer of fun to it. So, well, AJ, tell us a little bit about like where you're from, where you got your start in life.
Absolutely. So, born in Columbus, Ohio, but my dad was an Army guy, so I was kind of an Army brat. But I grew up for the most part down in the Louisville, Kentucky area. Out at Fort Knox is where he was stationed. So he got out of the military, stayed working at the hospital there. My mom worked out on base as a nutritionist, and so I grew up down there in the Fort Knox, which is about 30 minutes south of Louisville. Grew up in that area. And then after I graduated high school, went into the Army myself, was a communications specialist in the Army. So my job was setting up field communications, tapping into satellites, setting up field networks, and all that other really cool stuff. And then after I got out, try to figure out who I was in life, what I wanted to be, and bounced around to a ton of different jobs before landing in the world of IT, and really started off as just doing IT support and project management. Found out I was really good at that, and just kind of matriculated my way into cybersecurity a few years later.
It kind of feels like that the networks and IT sort of space was kind of drilled into you maybe a little bit. That was your sort of job description within in the Army. Is there some early training or influences there from that experience?
Yeah, I mean, so that's where I really kind of understood and learned that I was good at technical stuff.
Okay.
But when we think of IT, it's such a broad umbrella. There's so many different avenues that you can go into, whether it be coding, writing software, doing network stuff, data architecture. There's so many different avenues that you can go into underneath that fall underneath the realm of IT. And so my skill set is really in networks and understanding how data moves through networks. But more importantly, I think my natural gifting is understanding risk and understanding and looking at all the different ways that things can break, and then figuring out ways that we can mitigate those risks along the way. Yeah, and I think a lot of that came from the military. There's a lot of lessons that the military taught me that turned me into the person that I am today. And I think one of
Mhm.
the bigger lessons that I learned that still carries me through and is very applicable to what I do today, which is the greatest threat to the success of your mission is the threat that you didn't know existed, because that's the threat that you don't have a response to. And that's the one where you're scrambling. And when you're scrambling, you're not thinking through clearly. And that's when mistakes happen. And it's the same thing when we take a look back at business. When you think of your business, the biggest threat to your business is a threat that you didn't know existed, whether that is a digital threat, whether that is an economic threat, whether that is an environmental threat, because those are things that you don't have responses for. And then you find yourself scrambling, trying to figure out, okay, how do I now deal with this problem? And when you're on the defensive side, constantly reacting and trying to respond versus being proactive and being able to plan and execute, that's when mistakes happen. And so those are the lessons. That's one of the biggest lessons that I carry forward in everything that I do, and it's very applicable within business. So when I talk about helping businesses to analyze risk, that's just the way that my brain naturally operates. Is how do we find how many different ways can this thing go sideways, and then okay, how likely are these things to happen? If they do happen, how do we respond? And making sure that we've got contingency plans in place for all of those things. And so that's one of the biggest things that I focus on.
I see. I see. Let's talk a little bit about how many years did you serve, and thank you for your service. And can you tell us a little bit about your time serving?
Yeah. Thanks for your support. And so I did one enlistment in. So that's just 4 years. And I did all my time stateside. Never saw combat, never got deployed overseas. But it still took me 3 to 4 years to really acclimate to civilian lifestyle afterwards.
Hmm.
And I tell people all the time, the military does a great job of taking civilians and turning them into soldiers, but they don't do a great job of preparing those soldiers to enter back into the civilian world.
Hmm.
Because when you think about being in the military, there's two things that you lose transitioning out of the military that everybody loses, whether they realize it or not. The first is my sense of purpose. In the military, I'm part of something bigger than myself. I was part of this big
Yeah.
ideation of protecting freedom and democracy against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Out of the uniform, I was just AJ, and I didn't know who that was. I went in right out of high school. And so it's like, okay, who am I now? Who am I now as an adult, as an individual? Where do I fit in, and what is my purpose? So that's one thing that you have to try to figure out, because the military doesn't give you that after you transition out. It's up to you to figure out what that is. The second thing that I lost, which I think is equally as important, is I lost my community. In the military, you're surrounded 24/7, 365 by people that function and operate the same way that you do. Out of the military, it doesn't work that way. In the military, it's like everybody's mission focused. I tell people it's a very unique environment in the sense that we could hate each other, but I knew that when it was time to go to work, I could count on you to do your job and protect my life, and you can count on me to do the same, because the mission comes first. Everybody coming home came second, and then we can go back to our petty squabbles after that. And in the civilian world, it's not like that. You don't have that kind of common bond where it's like I can trust you to always have my back and not stab me in the back or leave me out hanging to dry. And so you find yourself, when you transition out, you find yourself trying to figure out, okay, now I got to figure out what my purpose in life is. And then on top of that, I have to figure out, what is my support system? What resources are available to me? And so those are the challenges that a lot of veterans face whenever they transition out. And that was one of the things that I really struggled with, as I tried to find my way. And so, I mentioned I bounced around a lot. I tried a bunch of different things. I got out and I worked for UPS for a while. I worked their third shift out of their Louisville air hub. So that's kind of my tie into
Okay.
logistics goes all the way
Uh-huh.
back in there. But then I did fast food restaurants. I was a manager there. I did waiting tables and bartending. I sold cars. I sold cars on a traveling sales team, which was a whole nother interesting dynamic. I did all of that before finding my way to work in the field of IT, which is what I
Yeah.
had natural skills and background in.
One of the most best podcast sort of conversations I've had was a guy named Paul Sivaswamy, and at the very end of the podcast, I asked him like for any words of advice or anything that he wanted to leave the audience with before we parted ways, and he brought up the concept of ikigai, which is a Japanese term, which basically means like your purpose and your sense of fulfillment will come from where you find the intersection of what you're good at, what people will pay you for, what you have passion about, and what is needed in the world. And if you can find the intersection of those four things, then this is kind of like your life's mission. And I always always remember him telling me about that, because it was about the time I found that for myself, right? With starting my own business, and kind of feeling like I had a purpose in the world of supply chain management. So it kind of sounds like you kind of had that same sort of pivotal time in your life and in your career.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all go through that. It's one of the things that I tell my kids, like, you have to try stuff. Like,
Hmm.
don't be scared to fail. Get out there and try things because you don't know what's going to resonate with you. We talk about kind of career paths and everything else like that. Well, I mean, I grew up in the 90s. I just turned 45 in January, so I'm not young,
Hmm.
but I'm not old by any stretch of the imagination. But whenever I was growing up, cybersecurity wasn't even a career path. Like, it wasn't even an option. So the
Hmm.
things that I'm doing in life right now, there was no plan for that. There was no
Yeah.
career path that I could travel down in order to get to it. It just happened to be that, I had a good set of values that the military gave me: loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, and personal courage. Those are the Army's core values. And, I let those guide me. And so, I mentioned earlier that I kind of fell into entrepreneurship and starting a company. Well, it's
Yeah.
because I led with integrity in everything that I did. I was working for an IT company, and the products and services that we represented weren't always the best fit for the client whenever I would come across the need. And so
Yeah.
rather than forcing them or selling them on something that they may not have needed or may
Yeah.
not have been the best solution for them, I would just recommend them to somebody else in the market space. Because while Columbus is a big city, it's really got a small hometown feel. So a lot of the players know who each other are. And so, I would come across somebody in a dental practice. Well, the company I represented didn't actually do a lot of stuff in the dental space. And so I would refer them over to people. Hey, this guy over here specializes in what you need. Talk to him and he'll take care of you,
Hmm.
asking nothing in return other than, hey, if you hear somebody complaining about computer issues, give me the first referral. Mention my name first, and they would go out and meet with the people that I had suggested and recommended, and then they came back to me and said, AJ, we met with your guy, but we didn't understand anything he said. Do you mind sitting in on a meeting since you understand what we need? Do you mind sitting in on a meeting and making sure that we're getting everything that we need? I said, sure. Once again, not looking to charge anything. Sat in on those meetings, 30 minutes, 45 minutes of work, no big issue. Once again, if I put good things out there, then good things will
Right.
come back to me.
Yep.
And I did that one time. At the end of the meeting, a guy by the name of John gave me an envelope, and he said, your time is worth something, take it. And so I get into the car, I open up the envelope, and it was a check for $500. And I was just like, holy cow, I just made $500 for being nothing more than a translator for 30,
Yeah.
45 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was like, okay. I was like, next time somebody asks me to do this, I'll see if they'll be willing to pay for my time. And a few months will go by and the opportunity presents itself. And I asked them, I'm like, would you be willing to pay for my time? And they said, sure. And they were like, what's your rate? And I was like, sheepishly, like $100. And they
Yeah.
happily
Yeah.
paid it.
Yeah.
But that goes back to being an entrepreneur. I wasn't trying to be, because if I would have thought about it, why didn't I start at 500? Because somebody had already paid me 500. And so,
Right. Yeah.
but that's literally how my business started, was as a fractional CIO, helping CIO, Chief Information Officer, just helping business leaders evaluate technology solutions and technology vendors to make sure that they were putting technology in place that was going to help them to achieve the strategic goals of the business. Because,
Yeah.
I'm sure that you've seen it before. Businesses grow and then they bolt on this technology, they bolt on this, they bolt on this, and it doesn't all work together. And next thing you know, 5 years later, they're trying to figure out, how do we make this big behemoth do what we need it to do? And then it becomes really expensive because they have to do a massive overhaul of everything, and standardize things. And so that's how I started my company, was trying to help businesses manage through that. And that was back in 2012.
Gotcha. Yeah, I can totally sympathize with. I think the struggle. I think in that sort of world is you don't know what the value of your time is yet. You don't know how to put a price tag on it right yet, because you don't have the frame of reference. You don't have someone saying, at this point, with this amount of credentials that you have, this is what you're worth, right? What
Right.
that experience is worth. Which it really just turns out to be what the market will bear, sort of. But you've got to feel your way through that a little bit before you start dialing in. Let's talk a little about your book. I'm intending to write a book of a very different nature than yours. I think by the end of the year, it's one of my New Year's resolutions. So tell me a little bit about your inspiration and the subject matter and kind of how that's been treating you being an author.
So, once again, just like I didn't plan on being an entrepreneur, and that wasn't part of my plan, writing a book was not part of my plan either. So I wrote the book in 2020. Like I said, it's The Art of War and Business Technology. Wrote in 2020. And the reason why I wrote the book was, we all remember 2020. The world comes in. So here was my perspective coming into 2020. I was born in January 1980, so I was turning 40. So I was like 20 plus 20 equals 40. I was like, the numbers are lining up. This is going to be my year. This is going to be a huge year. Then March comes, the world shuts down because of the virus, and then a few months later, I got diagnosed with thyroid cancer. And I was like, holy cow, what is going on? And so for me, I'll never forget sitting in there with the or in the office with the doctor, and she was like, "Well, good news is, she was like, bad news is you've got cancer, but the good news is you've got thyroid cancer. It's the most treatable form of cancer." And I was like, "Well, doc," I was like, "good and cancer are not two things that go in the same sentence." I was like, "So if you're trying to use that as a sales pitch later on, like dial that back." But I was like, okay, so what is my what are, you say it's the best form or at least the most treatable? What are my odds? And she was like, well, you've got. I was like, is it 100%? She's like, no. She's like, it's very very high. She's like, it's like 97 to 99% success rate of people not having issues. I was like, cool. I was like, but it's not 100%. So in my mind, being the risk guy, I'm like, okay, worst case scenario, what if I'm part of that 2 to 3% that this is the beginning of the end for me? What impact have I made on this earth? Like, what is my impact? What is my legacy? What have I done to make this world better? And what have I left behind that my kids could be proud of? And I didn't really feel like I had anything. And so I was like, you know what? I was like, let me just get my knowledge out, the things in which I do, the way in which I help business leaders analyze and evaluate technology. Let me just put it all down and let me dump it into a book. And at least if nothing else, that will outlive me and that'll be here around far beyond me. And so that was my impetus for starting to write a book. And oddly enough, I wrote the book and it took me longer to go through the edits and get it published. I wrote the book in 30 days.
Uh-huh.
And I will share with you my tips on how I did that.
Okay.
Um, so writing the book was super easy for me because I used technology in order to help write it. And here's what I mean. This is before ChatGPT and all that other stuff. What I did was I had a framework on the things in which I wanted to talk about and that I wanted to cover in the book. And so as I sat down, I started to write. What I realized that my struggling point was that I couldn't type as fast as I could think. And so I would lose my train of thought. I would have this idea of, I'm going to talk about this and I'm going to go from here to here to here. And I could visualize how it was all going to string together. But when I were started to type, I couldn't type it out fast enough. And I would get halfway through the sentence or paragraph and then forget where I was trying to tie it into or where I was trying to go. So what I did was I just recorded myself talking through all of this stuff and then ran it through. I think I used Otter AI back then and transcribed my voice into written word. And then that gave me the framework for the book. And then I just went in and cleaned it up from there. And so one of the biggest compliments that I get about the book is that it reads naturally, like we're just having a conversation. And the reason why it reads that way is because that's the way in which I wrote it. I wrote it having a conversation, talking to my microphone like it's a person, like you and I are talking right now. And it's like, hey, did you know about this? And here's the reasons why this is important. This is why you got to do this. And so it reads that way because that's the way in which I wrote it. So that's a little hack that you can use as you start down this path of writing your own book.
That's cool. Well, the funny thing about me, or just like a quick little preview here, is I'm all about creativity and how do I do something very different. And so the book, I intend to crowdsource it with other supply chain professionals in the industry. So I don't actually intend to do much writing myself at all, actually.
That's
So
interesting.
it'll be a collaborative effort, actually. So to kind of collect the the wisdom of the crowd that kind of does this supply chain type stuff. So anyway, a little different approach, but I
I
guess I
love
could
that
get
though.
everyone to record their bits. Um, but so let's talk about like like post being an author. Like, tell me about all the fame and glory that comes along comes along with that.
Yeah, there's not a lot of fame and glory that goes along with it. I was fortunate enough. So the book has won 3 awards. And I was fortunate enough to have a really good to partner up with a really good company that helped me with the publishing. So they helped to put it out there. So one of the things after I decided, okay, I committed, I'm going to write a book. I get this thing sketched out and roughed out, and I'm like, all right, I need an editor. And how do I publish? How do I promote? And so I went and interviewed a lot of different publishers because I was like, hey, how do I make this thing work? Big time publishers won't touch you because I didn't have the name or reputation. And so I ended up going the self publishing route. But I worked with a group that helped to design the front cover. They did all the editing, but more importantly, they helped to market the book because I didn't know how to do those things. And so that was one of the key things that I was looking for was somebody that could help to actually help promote the book and push it, and at the same time guide me in what it is that I need to be doing during this phases. And so they actually scheduled a ton of podcast meetings for me and interviews so I could help promote the book, which gave me collateral, which then that's how I got on the radar to get nominated for the awards that the book went on to win. It was a bestseller on Amazon, but that's easy enough to do. Just leading up and mass sales and everything else like that. But what the book has done post was it gave credibility to everything that I was doing. It's one thing to say that you're an expert. It's another thing to say that you're a best-selling author. It's another thing to say that you're an award-winning author. And that means that people read your stuff and they liked it enough that a body of people judged it and said, you know what, this is worth people putting their time and effort into reading. And so that's what it's really helped out with. So once again, another transition in life. AJ is now doing more public speaking
Yep.
because people then reached out to say, hey, we would love to hear and learn more about this topic. Do you come in and speak? And once again, I went through the whole challenges of, sure, I did a ton of speaking for free. And then one day somebody said, hey, we'll pay you to come out. And I'm like, oh, I can get paid to do this. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, that's interesting. So then once again, going through the whole time value money thing, how
Yeah.
much do
Yeah.
you charge? So my first speaking gig was first person paid me 500. The next one was 1,000. And then it kind of scaled from there. And,
Yeah.
you know, it's been an interesting journey in the speaking world because once again, it's not something that I had planned on doing.
That's fun. That's fun. How I like how you like kind of just keep stumbling into opportunities. It takes a particular kind of personality to to be open to that, and then to kind of keep working it and keep working at it and fostering it. Um, let's maybe start digging into the technical day-to-day type stuff that you do at Simple Plan. Can you tell us a little bit about the services, like kind of who your ideal customers are?
Sure. So Simple Plan IT, like I said, we kind of morphed into cybersecurity and really making that a focus. So we've got a US based security operations center, and that's a fancy way of saying I've got a group of very very smart people that all they do is that they monitor networks in real time, looking for all the different ways that criminals are getting inside and looking for anything that deviates from the norm. So you know to kind of look at it holistically, the way in which we approach cybersecurity and really digital risk, and we say digital risk because now the day and age that we're in right now, there's so many different ways that criminals are getting into networks. Back in the day, it was, hey, as long as I've got a firewall and I've got antivirus on my computer, then I'm pretty good. Well, that was just back in the day when we just had a server in our office and a computer on our desk. But now look at all the different ways that technology intersects with the businesses and the work that we do, from our cell phones and all the stuff that we do on our cell phones to, even if you've got desktop phones in your offices now, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be IP-based phone systems. So now that's on the internet. You've got cameras that are on the internet. Your alarm systems are tied into the internet and tied into your network. And so all these different things are converging on the network, which creates so many different ways that business or that criminals can get into an organization. And so the question now becomes, and this is what we started to look at, was like, all right, is it possible to lock everything down and prevent a breach from happening or prevent a penetration from happening? And the reality is that's almost impossible. I mean, uh, the saying people started saying within the industry, it's not a matter of if you get hacked, it's when you get hacked. And so it's like, all right, cool. Well, if that's the terminology and that's the mindset that we're going to start promoting, then the question now becomes, if it's not a matter of if or matter of when, it's if, or not a matter of if, it's when, cool, then how fast can you detect when that's happened? And so we started looking at that. How fast can you detect when something bad has gone wrong? Because as the military taught me, triage, the faster I can detect the problem is that it exists, the faster I can respond to it, minimize damage, minimize impact, and then hopefully keep that person alive, keep the mission alive, and keep everybody moving forward. Well, it's the same thing in digital risk. The faster I can identify that, hey, a bad guy's gotten in or something has happened, then can I get in, isolate it, prevent the damage from, or the damage or the penetration from expanding and creating a catastrophic event. And so, in order to do that, we use behavior based analytics in order to do that. And so, it's a fancy way of just saying we look at how data moves to the network, we look at how users interact with the network, and we look at how machines normally behave and operate. And through those three key metrics, we're able to create a baseline for what normal looks like for your organization. And so, anytime something deviates outside the norm, then it flags on our side, and my team now starts looking at, okay, well, what is going on here? Let's analyze this event. Why is, hey, normally Nathan logs into the system between the hours of 6 a.m. and 12 p.m. or 12 a.m. He doesn't, every day he's not in from 6 a.m. to midnight, but those are his normal hours of operation. Like he normally
Yeah.
is in that system somewhere in that window, but now he's logging in at 3 o'clock in the morning. Why? They might not be anything nefarious going on. You could be working on a project. So we're just going to start looking at the behavior now that we see, okay, he's logging at 3 o'clock. Well, wait a minute, let's look. Where's he logging in from? Is this a device that he's normally logs in from? Look at the IP address. Where's that coming in from? And so we're going to start analyzing those things in the moment and to determine, is this valid or is this something nefarious that's going on? In some cases, we'll reach right out to you and say, hey, Nathan, are you working on something right now? And you'd be like, yeah, I'm working on a late project. Cool. Keep on doing what you're doing. But we're seeing these things as they're happening because the industry standard right now is that the average network breach goes undetected for almost 7 months. It's 200 to 215 days that it goes undetected. And so if you give anybody 6 months inside your operations without your knowledge, there's nothing that you can hide from me. If I've got 6 months to poke around within your organization, within your data systems and your files, your financials, the way in which you operate, you give me 6 months without your knowledge, there's nothing that you can't hide and there's nothing that I can't take. And so that's why we focus on rapid detection, rapid response.
Interesting. I appreciate the walking through that very succinctly. So from the logistics, trucking, supply chain perspective, we are talking a lot these days about freight fraud and theft of physical cargo of trucks out on the roads and that sort of thing. There's quite a bit there, but it feels like there's been this shift in sort of like those folks that are like looking for those opportunities to make a quick buck, and they're going from, well, we don't even have to touch the physical truck cargo or anything. We can do all of this from the safety and comfort of our couch and a keyboard and a laptop and a phone.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about like where that intersection of logistics and trucking and supply chain and what you all do? Anything you all have seen or anything that you particularly focus on for those types of companies?
Yeah, so we look at the supply chain holistically when we look at it from manufacturing, logistics, and warehousing. And we see them as being big targets. And the reason why is that when you think about, from a criminal's perspective, if I can, you guys are moving, used to seeing big invoices, so a $20,000, $50,000 invoice, that's everyday common offense. And so if I can trick you into wiring $50,000 into my account versus the person it should have gone to. Well, for me, that's a big win. And if I get two of those, I mean, think about that. At $50,000, if I get four of those a year, that's $200,000 a year that I've made just from stealing and tricking people into doing something. So, I mean, if you're making $200,000 a year, that's a pretty good living that you've got for yourself. And once again, you just had to trick four people into doing something. And so now multiply that by the infinite amount of times and the infinite amount of attacks that they can launch from tricking somebody into clicking on an email that they shouldn't click into. What we're seeing now is a lot more of the fake brokerages where they're creating these fictitious entities online and reaching out to brokers and bidding on these different loads and then just taking the money right out of that because the company doesn't exist, or they're trying to hack into these systems, or once again trick a person into clicking on something and allowing them access, and then at that point in time they can reroute shipments because they have access to your shipping management system, your warehouse management systems, and all of those things. And so those are the things in which we're seeing, and the challenge becomes, I use this story often, but the whole thing that we have to realize is that if it touches the network, it's a point of vulnerability. And the story that I use is kind of the casino that got hacked a few years ago through their smart fish tank. There was I had no idea that there was so much money in those fish tanks from those saltwater tanks. Those things, I mean, some of those casinos have hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars invested in those fish tanks. But anyway, there was a casino that had a thermostat, a Wi-Fi thermostat on there that would help to regulate the temperature and the pH of the water. Well, there was a vulnerability in that. And what the criminal was able to do was access the Wi-Fi connected thermometer, laterally move on the network, and then they were able to steal all of their high roller information. And this happened back in 2017. And so, when we look at everything that we're putting on our networks, like I kind of mentioned before, every single one of those things becomes a point of vulnerability that we just don't have enough visibility into. And so those are the things that we kind of focus on is, can we have visibility into those changes of behavior patterns? If they would have had visibility into it, they would have seen, hey, this device, something hit this device and now it's moved this way. Why has it moved? What has happened? What's going on? Or they would have been able to see, hey, there's something from the outside constantly trying to ping and break into this thing. Why is it doing it? Can we shut it down and isolate it? No different than, are we evaluating all of the vendors that we do business with? When we talk about these fake brokers that are being set up right now, what are we doing? Do we have processes in place where we're properly vetting them out to ensure that they are a real company before we decide to elicit or solicit a contract from them or give them a contract where now they're able to walk away with money and sometimes the freight itself? And so it's just changing our mentality. And that's why I say cybersecurity isn't just an IT thing. And we need to start talking about digital risk because we all exist in this digital world. Everything that we do is now digitally moved and motivated. And so how do we now make sure that we're protecting ourselves as we interact in this digital world that we now live in?
Good point. Well put. Well, I think we could probably talk on the digital risk topic probably for hours on end, maybe over a nice glass of bourbon. But let's maybe see if we can grab one more really profound topic or concept that we want to make sure that we leave the audience with here today before we wrap things up on this today's podcast.
Yeah, I think it goes back to the very beginning, which is the greatest threat to your business is the threat that you didn't know existed. And so understanding in this digital world that we're in that it only takes one vulnerability, one small crack for somebody to get in and create havoc within your organization operations. The question now becomes, what are we doing to mitigate that? Do we feel confident in the things in which we're doing to to a level where it satisfies our risk tolerance. Because to address 100% of everything, is it possible? Sure, but it's going to be super expensive. So what is our risk tolerance? And I think, one of the things that I get asked often is, how much should we be investing in cybersecurity? And it comes down to, well, what do you have at risk? What does an hour of downtime cost you? If your network was to go down and you were to lose access to your data for 24 hours or 48 hours, how much is that going to cost your business? And just look at that, what's at risk, and then now put in the security measures or the risk preventative measures in order to satisfy that according to whatever your risk tolerance is. And so that's what I would really kind of advise people, is that figure out what's at risk, what's the financial cost behind it, and then based on your risk tolerance, start looking at investing in solutions that will satisfy that risk tolerance. And then just always keep in mind that the greatest threat that you don't know, or the greatest threat to your business, is the threat that you don't know exists. And as long as you're moving forward from that perspective, then I think that's how you stay ahead of the curve, or at least up with the times, because cybersecurity and the cyber threats are constantly evolving. And so we have to constantly remember, hey, the threat that we don't know is the one that's going to get us. And so what are we doing to stay on top of this stuff? What are we doing to try to stay ahead of these things? As we're incorporating new technology into our operations, how does that change our risk? And just asking those questions, because I think that's half the battle, is just being aware of the threats that we're bringing in and that we're opening ourselves up to, as we look to increase automation and do more with robotics and add these new cool technologies and AI and all this other buzzwords that we hear across the industry. As we incorporate those things, it creates more damage or more risk threats for us. And so we just got to make sure that we're mitigating those the best that we can and being aware of that.
Right. You said risk tolerance and guarding against risk and balancing your the cost of an infiltration versus that. It sounded almost like you were pitching like an insurance plan for digital risks. um, Anywho, well, thanks for coming on and sharing about your story, your expertise, and your experience as an entrepreneur and as an author and as a source of wealth of information in the digital risk space. And I look forward to seeing you maybe at an upcoming IWA event.
Sounds good. I look forward to it, Nathan.
All right.